whether you want to go with Robin's theory, and I do like Van Sertima. I think his theory
Can I ask a
makes
question?
sense.
Who's Van Sertima?
Ivan Van Sertima.
You said that Fat Joe is disrespectful for saying that blacks and Latinos created hip hop 50-50. Do you actually say 50-50?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
a lot of
Latinos were around, but you can't say 50-50.
Not at all.
Was Cleopatra purely Greek-looking, or was she admixed?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the third and final installment to my reaction to Robin Walker and Brother George's second visit to the Drazzy Show. All right, let's get into it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Brother George is with us now.
Hallelujah.
How you doing, sir? You all right?
I'm good.
Good. So I'm going to get to you about some questions on hip hop.
Ooh.
All right? Because Mr. Walker told me you're the guy for the hip hop stuff, yeah? But before we get there, I was talking to Mr. Walker about the Olmec Heads.
Right.
Right. So earlier on off camera, you opened up your book. And in your book, I saw a picture of the Olmec Heads. As I was saying before the doorbell rang, shout out to all my South American brothers and sisters.
I'm just gonna make this video as a quick breakdown of how to debunk the Black Olmec myth that has been getting really popular on TikTok lately. Myth number one, that the Nubians and the Phoenician languages share similarities and commonalities with Michiasoke, which is like the Olmec language. There's no evidence in linguistics that these share heritage or culture. And as an example, it would be like comparing English and Japanese and saying that they stem from one another or are influenced by one another. Both languages totally different things, not comparable. Also, if they try to use their writing systems as evidence, Olmec, Nubian, Phoenician are dramatically different from each other and they have no similarities whatsoever. Another argument is that the big noses or flat, wide noses, apparently in statues and pictures of the Olmec people, that the flattened width is evidence that they share common ancestors. A flat, wide nose is not exclusive to racial phenotype. It actually is shown in various parts all over the world because it is an environmental feature. Flat, wide noses are common in areas that have a tropical, wet climate environment. And these are common in Southeast Asians and Central America, and just anywhere that has this kind of environment. Another one is that Olmec statues have dark skin because the stone is dark or black, or they claim to be similar to those of African ancestry. But dark stones like basalt and stones like jade are common in Olmec culture, and they symbolize rain and fertility. So the colors of statues are about symbolism, not to physically represent someone's skin tone. It would be like saying that the Academy Award that is in gold means that one time someone that is gold-skinned existed. It's just not true.
I'm not trying to deprive you of your history, but you don't look like those Olmec heads. Mr. Walker, why does those Olmec heads look African?
That's just it, you see. One of the things that's happened in the American tradition is people will put out content and then the literature disappears.
People have pointed out that these heads depict African facial features such as large lips and a large flat nose. And that is really all the evidence they have in regard to these heads. And it's totally wrong. These heads do not depict African facial features. Who would have guessed that they actually just show the features of the Olmec people? I know, it's crazy. Just look at these images. Modern day people of Meso and South America have features such as large noses and lips. Also, this theory does not mention the hundreds of other examples of art that have South American facial features on it. Also, I have seen people claim that these statues have braided hair, and that is evidence of African descent. Horrible logic and confirmation bias. In reality, Native Americans often braided their hair, and this is no more an African tradition than a Native American one. These theories cherry-pick certain examples of art and try to prove their theory. It is unscientific. Again, people do not know how science works. You're supposed to look at the evidence and then come up with a conclusion.
But fortunately, I have some of that literature. So let me introduce you to an exhibition catalogue called the Olmec Tradition. And it says June 18th to August 25th, 1963, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Texas. So what they did was they held an exhibition about the Olmecs in Houston. And this had nothing to do with black scholars. This is mainstream, what they call Mesoamerican scholarship. And they have an article called The Olmec Culture in that same book by Alfonso Medellin Zenlin, right? And then we take a look at what they have. And they have an Olmec head with hair.
Okay. And they look like Negroid hair, yeah?
Well, here's the thing. There's the sculpture. Does that make sense? You can see that's blatantly hair, right?
Yep.
Yep. And what they do is they comment on it. So I'm going to read you the comment that they have. For a long time, there was concern as to what the hair is or was, since in the case of colossal heads, they are invariably covered by a cap or helmet. This doubt could have gone on indefinitely, but finally some light has been thrown on the problem with the discovery of two heads, 0.75 meters tall, which are identified as numbers 1 and 2 of Laguna de los Cerros, and which together with the characteristic cheekbones and platyrrhine nose, there is a hair arrangement or head of curly hair.
Okay, so this brings me back to the next question I wanted to ask, right? So where did these Native Americans come from? Because if these Olmec heads were found in the ground, have any kind of like specialist given the decade or the era that these Olmec heads were first sculptured in?
No one's entirely sure.
Okay.
But if you said within the last 4,000 years.
That
Within
far
the
back?
last- Yeah, but Native Americans have been around for longer than that.
No, but I mean, those heads have been in the ground for that long.
Yeah, within the last 4,000 years. So if we go back 2,000 years, that would take us to the time of Christ. Go back 2,000 years before that. So it's within that period. So some people say the Olmec heads could be 1,200 BC, something like that. But the Native Americans were still there. Does that make sense?
So where did the Negroids get there?
No, that would mean that the Negroids are immigrants, visitors.
I see.
And the sculptures themselves would have been done by Native Americans. This is their art.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but what it is their art depicting foreigners.
Why would they do that? Were they very influential on the
Right,
African?
and therefore we can infer inference. We can infer influence, do you see?
What does infer mean?
Infer means we can assume. Here's the point. If I make a massive sculpture of you,
Yeah.
we can assume that you had an influence on me.
Okay. I
And
see what you
that's
mean.
what that sculpture represents.
All right.
Does that make sense?
So this confuses me because it would have to be a very serious influence for them to create these massive colossal heads. And
Exactly.
But what it is because we assume that black people have no influence on the world.
Yeah.
We assume that that's the way it's always been. And the Olmec heads proves that that's not how it's always been.
But can I interject?
Yes.
Did they have, obviously they had an influence. However, did they have an influence in terms of establishing the culture, which is come to be known
Now
as
some
Olmec?
people say that.
Yeah.
I don't go that far. Yeah, I don't go that far. But some people say that because the logic that, as far as I can tell, is Native Americans had a civilization.
yeah, we can see it. It's evident.
Visitors came along, and they made art of those visitors. Let's be clear. Who made the art? Native Americans made the art of those visitors, and we know they're visitors because in the Olmec burial grounds, everybody there is an African. Yeah. There's one burial ground where I think 13% of the people there are Africans. Does that make sense? And therefore, them being there in the burials And they're not making up 100%, which means they're visitors.
Yeah. So you're trying to tell me, there were African bones
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
in
Yep.
ancient South America
Yep.
amongst the ancient South Americans.
Yes. But what happens is scholars today don't want to go there. They're going to try and come with all kinds of explanations, all of which are going to be nonsense. So the scholar that did the work is a scholar called Andres Wiercinski. And he presented his paper in 1972, I believe, where he presented that data. And people can get angry, people can get upset, but they're not going to make that data disappear. Yeah.
So it seems to me, even though you're going to that extent, of course, it explains like Van Sertima's theory.
The Africans came at various times from different areas. The one that I want to deal with, because most of the evidence exists for this, is Africans who came out of the Egyptian Nubian world. I'll call it the Egypto-Nubian world, around 800 years before Christ. I'll explain to you how I arrive at that date, how they arrived at that date, and I'll show you the types of evidence. Now, I want you first to look at this head, this stone head.
Okay.
Now, this head, they found a dozen of these heads. They found them in a very specific area. Before we go to the area, look at the head carefully. The lips, the very generous type of lips that you find in the tropical areas, the Africoid type. The broad nose with the very broad, flared type of nostril and the kind of flattened base. The brow ridge. And look at the helmet. That's a very peculiar type of helmet. It does not occur anywhere else in America. It has a strap along the face, falling along the ear, and it has a circular ear plug. Those helmets, exact type of helmet. Suddenly these things begin to appear, and 4 of them appear at a place called Levanta within that basin area. Levanta was the holy capital of the Olmec civilization. And on the platform, the religious platform where those people worshipped, they found a wooden religious platform in which 4 of the heads were embedded. The stone could not be dated, but the wooden platform was inextricably linked up with the stone. The archaeologists took carbon samples, 9 carbon samples, they dated it. It gave a dating 814 plus or minus 134 BC, which means that anything between around 900 and something BC, right down to about 618 BC, you have some strange foreign movement of foreigners into that area. They not only found this type of head, they not only found these type of features, they not only found this type of helmet, but they found terracottas, that is clay portraits of Africans that did not have the helmet, where you could see the texture of hair quite distinct from the Native American head, because the Native American was an Asiatic coming across the Bering Strait, and you have lots of sculptures of that Asiatic figure, and this figure was quite distinct. And they found in the dry areas of the Olmec world skeletons that could be linked with continental African types, Africoid types. Professor Wiercinski, a Polish skull expert, showed that these were African type skeletons. And what is significant is that the same place and the same time these heads and skeletons and clay portraits appear with Africoid type hair and features and helmets, you have things suddenly occurring in the American world that do not occur before. The first pyramid is built in America in that period. It appears on the very same religious platform where the Africoid heads are found. For the first time, the Americans are making these huge statues when before they were making small things largely out of clay. For the first time, they're working in monumental stone. For the first time, the Americans are moving massive blocks of stone from quarries 80 miles away downriver. Nobody, no one in the ancient world mastered the art of transporting vast blocks of stone downriver for sculpture as the Egyptians. The Americans had never done it before, and suddenly they're using a ritual orientation, north-south axis for their pyramids, for their religious platforms. That axis, the north-south axis, is an axis that was used only by the Egyptians at that time.
Van Sertima's theory, which is that the ancient Olmec civilization had a black influence in its foundation, because his take is, the heads were probably for ceremonial purposes, colossal. I don't know if Robin has shared this, but obviously he's talked about the bones. 13% were strongly Negroid. Yeah. Others were admixed, and even some of the sculptures, because not all of them were massive, some of them, they're different scales and sizes that show different phenotypical traits, some even suggesting a kind of like biracial kind of like quality. Wow. In different textures. So these colossal heads are distinctly Negroid. So Van Sertima was saying, well, it is a Native American civilization, but clearly the Africans had a prominent and an important influence within that society. I guess that kind of makes sense. And the thing that we have to sort of like work out is the facts are that some of these heads are profoundly African looking. They don't have your typical sort of like Mesoamerican phenotypical traits. So how do you square that circle? Plus as well, we've got the evidence of the skeletons and the other sculptures as well. So this means that either one or, from my way of looking at it, that Van Sertima was correct, that they did help to influence and start in some significant way what we now know as the Olmec civilization. Or if you want to go down the route of they're just foreigners and visitors and they had no say in that civilization, you have to acknowledge that there was an ancient black civilization that came from somewhere that was very advanced and respected by the ancient Mesoamerican civilization. You can't get away from that. Yeah. And what we want to stop people from doing is trying to come up with lies like, oh, they were just babies' heads, and their tools were blunt. I can tell you that as an artist, and one of the things that naysayers try to do is to say, well, because they were so colossal, they just softened the features. As an artist, I can tell you that if I'm working on something like that, and I was Native American, I could easily make those features look Native American, even if, because like the typical thing is the hooked nose or the larger nose. Yeah. Even if the plane of the surface that you're working with, you don't want to extend that because that's going to, or work into the material so that the nose is more prominent, you can still make it thinner. There are stylistic things that you can do. You can't tell me that this sophisticated civilization couldn't produce artists of a caliber who could solve that problem with even the tools that they had. It makes absolutely no sense. And you have to tie that in with the fact that there is also the evidence of the bones as well. How do you get around that? You can't, apart from lying. And so that's what we want to clear up. What do you think, Robin?
I'm of the immigrant view.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a Native American thing, but the immigrants, as you say, came from advanced civilization. And the immigrants had respect, which is why they're in the art like that. And we're not going to get around the curly hair. In other words, people can run up their mouths as much as they like. They ain't going to get around that. Nor are they going to get around the fact that it's in an exhibition catalog, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Texas, June the 18th to August the 25th, 1963. I ain't going to get around that.
And there's another important thing. Whether you want to go with Robin's theory, and I do like Van Sertima, I think his theory
Can I ask
makes
a question?
sense.
Who's Van Sertima?
Ivan Van Sertima, a historian, linguist, and scholar who reshaped our understanding of African history. From his groundbreaking book, They Came Before Columbus, to his testimony before the U.S. Congress, Van Sertima dedicated his life to uncovering the true impact of African civilizations on the world.
A historian, scholar, and visionary who forever changed how we view history.
Ivan Van Sertima, a Guyanese-born historian and anthropologist, is best known for his book They Came Before Columbus, 1976, in which he argued that Africans had contact with the Americas long before Christopher Columbus. He presented evidence such as linguistic similarities, African-style art in pre-Columbian cultures, and the presence of African genetic traits in some indigenous American populations.
His work challenged the Eurocentric narratives. His scholarship wasn't just about history. It was about reclaiming the truth of African contributions to world civilization.
Van Sertima was not just a historian. He was also a linguist who studied the connections between African and indigenous American languages. His research explored how African civilizations influenced cultures worldwide, challenging Eurocentric historical narratives. In 1987, Van Sertima was invited to testify before the U.S. Congress during hearings on the contributions of Africans to world history. He used this platform to emphasize Africa's role in early civilizations, particularly its influence on science, engineering, and navigation. To further his mission of highlighting African achievements, Van Sertima founded the Journal of African Civilizations, which published scholarly research on the contributions of African cultures in fields such as astronomy, mathematics, and engineering.
Ivan Van Sertima inspired countless scholars, proving that history is far richer when all voices are heard. Today, we celebrate his legacy. Let his life remind us to seek knowledge and uncover untold stories.
He was very influential in the 1980s, in particular, in terms of like the Black consciousness movement and a wave of academics who started to reposition Black history in a more positive content. But he went there with South America in terms of like the Olmec civilization. So he was blatant that these Olmec heads, and I think the main thing was that the Olmec heads are Negroid and Black. And he knew some of the earlier scholars that Robin is talking about. So that's his position. But his position was not that it was a totally Black civilization. His position was that it had significant Black influence. Now, squaring the circle between Robin and Van Sertima, what you can't get away from is the evidence. The second thing that means is that Van Sertima's idea that they came before Columbus must be true, whether or not they were visitors or a fundamental part of that society. Nobody's trying to take anything from anyone, but there are issues that people need to stop lying about. Just be honest about it. Plus as well, the other intermediate statuary and statues, they don't talk about that. Why? Because they show people with classic Native American features and people with admixed features. And then you've got the colossal heads that look like, I think some of the academics then used to call it like Joe Louis. I think one of them was nicknamed Joe Louis.
I don't even know who Joe Louis is. But I know they look like Nigerians.
Yes.
They look like they got strong Nigerian features. Like, do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's evident.
You believe Fat Joe said hip hop was Puerto Rican and Black? Whoa!
Well, you said that Fat Joe is disrespectful for saying that Blacks and Latinos created hip hop 50-50. Did you actually say 50-50?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
a lot of
Latinos were around, but you can't say 50-50.
Not at all. Not at all. You can't even say 90-10. Puerto Ricans, do you feel like they played a part in creating hip hop?
Absolutely not. The influences were our parents' music. Like, it had nothing to do with any outside people, and any individuals that might have been from those places did not bring that culture to hip hop. They had to act Black in order to assimilate to hip hop culture.
What are your views on this? Because I personally, I look, the way Mr. Walker has described it to me, I get the FBA, but I think sometimes there must be extreme sections of their ideology. Some people must have some extreme views to just cancel out everyone and just make it FBA. Do you think that's what's going on here, or do you think that is true that it was only African Americans that created hip hop?
I think what's happened is that people are adjusting their position. This conversation has been going on for, I think, over a year. I think the first time we were on here, it had come to some kind of resolution. But I think what's happened is that some people are exaggerating certain things. I don't see how you can take it away from being, unfortunately, FBA is a politicized term. So what I'd like to do is soften things and just talk about, is it a a African American art form, or should we claim that it's not really African American because there were Puerto Ricans there? I've had many conversations with Robin about this because Robin is a jazz head and we're both into music. And so we've talked about it. And I've come to a sort of like conclusion and a position, which is that it has to be viewed as an African American art form. What Lord Jamar wanted to do was to get a whole load of the early artists to basically get to the bottom of how much influence did the Puerto Ricans have in the early phases of hip hop. And one of the things that Prince Whip said, because it was him, Ruby D, who was part of Grand Wizard Theodore's group.
Okay.
They're both Puerto Rican.
All right.
And he was saying, he admitted that in the early days, you did have Puerto Ricans there like himself, Ruby D, but it was very much a black cultural sort of like milieu. They were going into what they thought was, a black, kind of like, dance space. And so their way of looking at it was that there were very few Puerto Ricans that were involved at that time, because there were certain cultural attitudes as well that, these are black people, you got to be careful, it's dangerous and so forth.
Yeah.
There were certain of them who, had friends and friendships. They got involved with it. They were a part of the scene. They helped to evolve and innovate it. But it was mainly people from those kind of like neighborhoods, so it was majority black.
Yeah, definitely. How I feel about it is anybody that says that hip hop is anything but a black American art form is dead wrong. And anybody who says people from other countries didn't make major contributions to hip hop is dead wrong. But how I really feel about it is this.
I don't give a fuck. Who gives a fuck? Y'all niggas be focused on dumb shit.
Why are we devoting so much energy talking about who created hip hop when we really should be focused on who controls it?
Hip hop itself is an institution. That's run by white people. What the fuck you talking about? Jews own that shit. What you saying? That ain't no institution.
Jews can't own.
White people own that shit.
Jews can own the music business. They can't own hip hop. They can't own hip hop.
Let's cut the blade a little thinner. They run it.
Listen,
They run it.
The Jews can sell the product. The Jews can own the money that goes out for advances. They can't own hip hop.
You think the man got paid?
Who?
Man who invented these.
Shit, he richer than a motherfucker.
Why? You think he get a percentage?
Why not?
Nigga, please. The man who invented them things, just some sad ass down at the basement of McDonald's. Thinking of some shit to make some money for the real players. Nah, man, that ain't right. Fuck right. It ain't about right. It's about money. Now, you think Ronald McDonald gonna go down that basement and say, hey, Mr. Nugget, you the bomb. We selling chicken faster than you can tear the bone out. So I'm gonna write my clowny ass name on this fat ass check for you. Shit. And the nigga who invented them things, still working in the basement for regular wage, thinking of some shit to make the fries taste better, some shit like that. Believe.
Still have the idea though.
I mean, this conversation, we wouldn't be having this, say, 15 years ago, because people understood, yes, the pioneers were of Jamaican extraction, but they grew up where? In New York.
So they're basically
They grew
influenced
up
by
with those cultural influences, and that plays a big part. My way of looking at it is time, space, and place. I believe Professor Griff.
We don't want people to think that NWA had something to do with that agenda, which they didn't. They were victims of that, like we were. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if they seen what was going on, and they sat back in their smoke-filled back rooms and said, now wait a minute, there's a sound that's happening. Let's manipulate the sound. Let's manipulate those groups that are the forefront of that particular vibration, and let's steer and gear it. And let's use it to neutralize these brothers in the East. You understand what I'm saying? And they midway through in the 80s, they neutralized Public Enemy, neutralized KRS-One and conscious hip hop, came in with the the vibratory frequency, the lower vibratory frequency, I don't care if it was pimping, thugging, hustling, gang banging, or whatever it was, it neutralized conscious hip hop. And by the time the Chronic came out, Dr. Dre, it was a rap.
Talks about
wasn't he Public Enemy?
Yeah. So he does a show with from time to time the guy from the Underground Railroad, Brother Rich.
I don't know.
He's a YouTuber. He's very astute. He's very ingrained in that kind of thing, and he's had a lot of dialogue with Professor Griff. And I've noticed that years ago, Professor Griff has said the same thing over and over again. He sees it as an expression of that old African thing. The last time he was on Brother Rich, when they had this conversation, Brother Rich's audience seemed to be riling against that because of this new perception of things. It's got to be considered as being FBA. You're not saying that. My understanding of what the elder Professor Griff was saying, when you say it's the old African thing, it doesn't mean that it's borrowed from calypso or reggae. It doesn't mean that it's borrowed from the original Afro beats or anything like that. No, each time it materializes, it's its own specific thing in a specific time and place. And so when you have calypso taking place in the Caribbean, that it's its own specific thing once it finds its voice. When you have jazz, that's its own specific thing. Hip hop is its own specific thing. It's for me, and I think the last time I was here, I talked about how I see it as the Harlem Renaissance 2.0. For me, it's kind of like the community that was artificially deflated. Economically, it was depressed. You had the landlords, burning their own properties for the insurance money. It was a reaction to what was going on in Harlem.
Well, you have to be careful though,
at
because
that time it was a reaction, and the people, I believe that it's that old African thing. They had nothing, and look at what they created.
Egyptians are now being called out as racists, just because they were attacking the new Netflix documentary that is faking history by portraying ancient Egyptians and Queen Cleopatra as black. Despite the fact that Queen Cleopatra was of Macedonian origins, which definitely denies the fact that she was black. But why no one ever mentioned that faking history, blackwashing it, and stealing someone's identity is a kind of racism too?
Let me go to Cleopatra. I'm kind of, Robin, you're saying that they would depict her as black. Because of course we're talking about Cleopatra the 7th. Who might, oh, here we are. Blimey. Okay.
You think I'm gassing it?
No.
Black History was gas. You thought the Black History
This has to go up. This Adraz, you have to definitely put this up.
Everything you've got, please send it to me. Everything you've got, please send it to me.
What I would say about that is, of course, the conversation
Who's that now?
Julius Caesar.
See?
Yes.
Right, is there any confusion?
No.
What
I
this
see a
speaks
black
to-
dot and a white dot.
What this speaks to is the general perception of the ancient Egyptians as being black. That's why she's depicted like that. Now, my position is that I know there's been this huge controversy since this Netflix series.
These past few weeks, a new Netflix documentary about Cleopatra has sparked a lot of debate, with everyone talking about it. Most people were complaining that the actress hired to play Cleopatra was apparently black, and that the Egyptian queen of Macedonian descent was not. When we talk about Cleopatra, it is important to specify which one we are talking about because there were actually many Cleopatras. In this video, we are talking about Cleopatra the 7th or Cleopatra Philopator, who ruled Egypt from 51 to 30 BC. The first question we should ask is, why is this specific Cleopatra so famous? Well, in the African context of Kemet, the African civilization that preceded Egypt, Cleopatra isn't really relevant because she represents the invasion of Kemet by a foreign nation. She ruled at a time when indigenous Egyptians were still fighting to get rid of that Greek occupation. So, all her fame comes from the European context of history. While Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra actively influenced Roman politics at a crucial period and was especially known for her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Arguments for a white Cleopatra. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, so she came directly from a lineage of Greek Macedonian rulers. In other words, Southern Europeans. When we look at her family tree, we notice that from the first ruler Ptolemy I, Soter, the great majority of Ptolemaic rulers were of Greek descent, so basically, they kept it in the family and almost never mixed with other groups of people. And based on numerous of depictions supposed to represent her, she seemed to look like a European woman. So, we can assume that Cleopatra was probably white like most Southern Europeans today. Arguments for a non-white Cleopatra. Despite the fact that the Ptolemies usually kept it in the family, there has been some deviations from the rule. And it actually occurred multiple times in the dynasty. Cleopatra I, the one who started that dynasty, was of Greek, Persian, and Iranian descent. Her mother Laodica was of Iranian and Persian descent, while her father Antiochus the Great also had Iranian ancestry. So, we already start with a mixed-race Cleopatra. And then comes the argument related to Cleopatra's direct lineage. We don't know who Cleopatra's mother was. This is the main arguments used by those claiming a mixed-race ancestry for the queen. It's not enough to prove that she was not white, but it brings us to a 50-50 situation. We don't really know. And to that we can add the fact that according to scientists, Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe IV, was mixed race. It doesn't prove anything about Cleopatra, but shows that mixes occurred in that dynasty.
By the time Cleopatra comes around, Kemet was pretty much done. She was of very little significance, if any, when it comes to African history. So whether she was black or white,
I don't give a fuck. Who gives a fuck? Y'all niggas be focused on dumb
in these reaction videos alone, we talked about several African queens. We talked about Queen T, we talked about the Kandakes of Nubia, Amana-Reines, Amana-Shakido, Amana-Tore, and there's so many African queens that we could focus on if we really want to talk about that. But Hollywood won't make a show or a movie about any of them. Instead, what black queens do they give us? They give us Cleopatra, who really didn't do much when it comes to African history. They give us a woman king, whose people captured Africans and sold them to Europeans as slaves. And they make Anne Boleyn black.
I think it was produced by Jada Pinkett.
Yeah.
And she used someone who was actually meant to be mixed race. So and it's a very old debate. Was Cleopatra purely Greek looking, or was she admixed? And this is something that it's not coming out of the black intelligence.
Or was she this?
Well, here's the thing, right? Because she's a Ptolemy, she's descended from the general Ptolemy, which means that she's got Greek blood in her. There is no doubt about that. The question is, and I think this she had a half sister who they think they found her skeletal remains, and when they did the reconstruction, it was someone who looked biracial. And of course, the Ptolemaic kings would have been marrying, we're talking about several generations down, would have been marrying people who would have African ancestry. So the question is, was she pure or did she look pure? In my mind, I'm kind of thinking, did she look like, she could have looked like Mariah Carey, who has some African blood in her.
But you can see
could have
she looks very white.
Who's the pianist? I'm thinking
Alicia Keys.
Alicia Keys, you know, who's also biracial as well. And so these are the kind of phenotypes you could have, you know. So or she might have looked maybe more like Beyonce. I think that's, for me, the most extreme, or kind of like Iman, which is what they made her sister look like.
I see.
So the question is, what did she look like? People aren't 100% sure. She was definitely Greek. So my position is, the sensible thing is...
Let me correct that. From a Greek dynasty.
From a Greek dynasty. From a Greek dynasty. So
how is that image? Why is that image of her?
This is a medieval image.
Whose depiction is that?
Yeah, it's a medieval image from Europe in 1321.
So could the Europeans have got the history wrong?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Or it could be that we've got it wrong, and do you see?
Yeah.
So the whole thing with Cleopatra, I say the jury's out. Yeah. And why the jury's out is, if you've got several generations of Greek men marrying African women, 2 generations, you're still going to produce this.
Yeah.
Do you see? So for me, I say the jury's out. But the fairest prediction is exactly as George says. Get somebody of a biracial background, which is what Netflix actually did.
Yes. And so people were, the thing that I realized is that was just a proxy. The reason why people were saying that, they made her look black and not being accurate and saying that they tried to show someone who was biracial is because they know that black scholars and even scholars in the West who aren't of African origin are telling the truth about the ancient Egyptian stock and also the aristocracy and the royalty before the Ptolemaic period were fundamentally black.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro. Shammai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shammai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shammai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shammai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shammai was Egyptian.
Hold on, bro. Y'all got all that equipment, spent all that time to try and find out the race. But as soon as y'all find out he was black, now race doesn't matter.
Fundamentally black.
What's the Ptolemaic period? What is that?
That's in the Greek period.
The Greek period. Oh, I see. Okay.
But here's the point, though. For the Arab critics coming out the way they did, they showed their asses, and I'll show you why. They said they're taking our history. This is Ptolemaic history. So they've just admitted they're Ptolemaics. Once you've admitted that, then don't be claiming anything pharaonic, because you've just claimed Ptolemaic.
Yeah.
You said that's your history.
Yeah.
And I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, bro. That's your
history. Yeah.
The modern Egyptians need to stop. They don't base anything about Kemetic culture. I'm in Atlanta, thousands of miles away, and I know if I were to go out today and go to a club or a party or a festival or anything, I know I'll see an ankh, whether it be a chain or a necklace or a tattoo. I will see the ankh way more here than I would in Cairo. When it comes to this, the modern Egyptians are like toddlers. You know, like how you have a toddler who they have a toy and they don't want to play with it. But as soon as another kid comes around and starts playing with it, that's when they want to play with it. And that's how the modern Egyptians deal with Kemetic culture. They don't embrace it at all. The only time they want to embrace it is when Africans want to embrace it. And Africans in particular. I don't hear any uproar when Europeans portray ancient Egyptians. But when Africans do, that's when they have a problem.
Yeah. Dead bodies in the streets back in the days. You said back in the days, you could see dead bodies in the streets on TV.
Yeah, in Africa. Yeah.
In Africa.
Basically, for us old heads,
give me a time.
No, if you're watching TV in the 70s and the 80s, and anything about Africa came on, you knew to wince. Because the sorts of film footage that they would show, right up until, when was Live Aid? When was that?
85? Was that 85?
Or the first one?
Yeah, but even
1985.
Yeah.
1985.
Throughout all of that period, if you saw any film footage coming out of Africa, you knew to do this, right? Because the imagery was so horrific, so negative. It's not hard to see why so many people from that generation were ashamed to be African. It's not hard to see. So the Africa used to be shown in a couple of ways.
The African is never to be presented in his glory. He's only to be presented as a sick man, a beaten man, a slave, or a colonial, or a primitive.
There would be there was a TV series called Survival Special. And what they meant by survival is the survival of primitive tribes, basically. And what they would do is pitch up their tents next to a primitive tribe and film them. Yeah? And that was the only imagery that you would see of Africa that wasn't a news story. So that was one image. And then the second set of images are the news stories. And with Africa, there were three types of news stories, and you could predict. It would be coup, civil war, and famine.
Yeah.
You could guarantee that those would be the stories. And when they were showing the famines, it was horrible, bro. Yeah. When they were showing the civil wars, yeah, you would see dead bodies. And it wasn't dead bodies that you would see with any other group of people. But if it's Africans, oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah.
You know, that makes me understand what it was like for me. I'm 40. I was in secondary school in the 90s, mid to late 90s. I was in primary school early 90s to mid 90s. And all throughout the early 90s to the late 90s or the end of the 90s, I remember Caribbean kids would mock the hell out of me for being African. And I get it now, because if this is the perception they had of Africa, why would you want to affiliate yourself with those people?
Exactly.
I totally get it. By the time when I was a kid, I didn't get it. I genuinely thought, because I would see black and think, we're black, I'm black, I'm black. But they would always make it very clear, no, you're African, you're a Zulu warrior, you're a dirty, a boo-boo scratcher, and...
I'm from Africa, you from Africa, you African booty scratcher.
all that kind of stuff. African bums, itchy, boom, you name it, right? And at the time, I was too young to understand the psychological, influence that had created this, distance between us. I was too young to get it. So I just never understood it. I just used to always think, okay, you know what? We're not the same. We'll just leave it as that. But obviously, we'll still play with each other. We'll still hang out. So it was kind of like something that eventually was in the background, but was kind of lingering. But when I got older and I started to read up on books, and I started to meet up with certain educated people who were giving me some knowledge and helping me, cure my ignorance, I realized what you said is so true. That kind of imagery.
You cannot grow out of such images. You can never feel pride in any such image. You have to balance it against something else. We are aware of how horror is occurring in modern Africa. But you can't just be aware of the horror. You have to be aware of the great achievement of the Africans. You have to balance these things.
That kind of perception, even before TV, it was in books. The dark continents.
Let me hear it for instance. As you know, I'm the Black History Man.
Yes, sir.
When I was invited to watch Half of a Yellow Sun.
Don't know what that is.
Half of a Yellow Sun. It's a film set in Nigeria.
Nigeria?
I don't know.
Okay, and it's about set during the Nigerian Civil War period. And I remember watching this, and this was only a few years ago, and it dawned on me, this is the first time I've ever seen any imagery coming out of Nigeria.
It's always been Europeans' perception, right?
It
Right,
featured
so
Tandy Newton, didn't it?
consequently, I'm the Black History Man. That's the first time I've ever seen those kinds of images. So the first time you ever saw what a Nigerian house looks like. The first time you've ever seen what a Nigerian car looks like, or, you know, the cars that they have. The first time you've ever seen the inside of a Nigerian university depicted in a fictional setting. First time I've ever seen a ball set in Nigeria, because there's lots of balls in the thing, and you've got a jazz group and that type of thing. And then how people are dressed and what they're eating and blah, blah, blah. Now, for me, it was a revelation. And it shouldn't have been a revelation, because I should have seen those images all the time. But because it was a Nigerian filmmaker, based on a Nigerian book, do you see? Now, when we were growing up, those sorts of images that I saw in this film, Half of a Yellow Sun, did not exist anywhere.
You thought it was mud huts?
No, because I knew better. Yeah. But everybody else was thinking that. Oh, hell yeah. Because what did we see on TV? Survival Special.
Yeah.
What did we see? The other images being the coups, the civil wars, and the famines. And when they were showing that stuff, and even things that were deliberately insulting, like you see a famine situation, you give a child water, then film them, knowing that the flies would come
and sweat.
Right? You see, the idea is, those were the images. If you were to ask a black person, how many images have you seen of Africa in the last 2 weeks? If they saw 10 images, 3 of them would be a Civil War story. 3 of them would be this. 2 of them would be the flies, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? And then, okay, you're a learned person. Let's look in the books. You know, the geography books, there'd always be, turn to page 75. And page 75 has got a child suffering from malnutrition.
Yeah, these
belly's
huge
like
stomach.
this.
Yeah.
Right? Trust me, it was horrible. It was horrific.
Now, you know, earlier on, you talked about your perception of Africa from an Afro-Caribbean perspective at a time before social media, right? Just a segue to that. In school, was there also an influence in school? Because
negative.
My generation,
Negative.
we never had that, my generation. But I know my uncles and people prior to me, they probably were told certain things about African Americans and Caribbeans. I don't know. None of them have said anything to me. But I don't know where that perception of African Americans and Caribbeans will come from.
Okay, let me explain growing up, African Americans had the highest status of all of us.
Yes.
Why? Because they're in films.
There
was a whole
major
generation,
platforms.
Shaft,
Superfly,
all of that good stuff, right? So consequently, we saw African Americans. Then you had groups like the Jackson 5. You know that there was a Jackson 5 cartoon?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's a vague memory.
Yeah. Again, as little kids, we watched that. And
MC Hammer, you name it.
Oh, that's
I know, but I'm just giving an example of like how we've always just seen African Americans on like major
consequently,
platforms.
And then you then had what was called the Black Film Revolution, which I think started in '87, and that started with Spike Lee.
Oh, so you're not talking about the blaxploitation. You're talking about a different
that's
era.
later now. Because blaxploitation, those films weren't actually made by black people. They had black stars, but they weren't made by black people.
Most of them.
Yeah,
The spookers sat behind the door.
Now, Blue Laces 2, one of my favorite records on the album. You make a spook who sat by the door reference.
You know about that, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I read that book, but I don't think you a spook who sat by the door. I think your intentions are pretty clear.
Well, now I would say so, but even to the point we made earlier, that's one of the reasons I was so vocal about where I was coming from and what I represented, because I knew who I wanted to mobilize. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna name my last album "The Spook That Sat by the Door." You know what I mean? When I finished my situation with our partnership at Atlantic, and for anybody that ain't seen that movie or read the book, it's about a gang member from Chicago who presented himself in a way he never caught no cases. He had a clean cut look, and he infiltrated the CIA.
Yep.
And he became educated and basically he used their agenda which was to have a token nigga in the CIA for political reasons. You know, we gonna speak blunt, fuck it. He used it against him. And I think that in terms of hip hop, you think of the message that they embrace, I feel parallel with, like, you know what I mean? The power structure. I don't mean the culture of hip hop, but the power structure of music. They got prescribed personas they expect from us.
Pimping, thugging, hustling, gang banging, or whatever it was.
You know what I'm saying? So I feel like the way he used their intention against him was one of my underlying strategies. You know what I'm saying?
You got to put the medicine in the candy.
100%.
And what's interesting about that book, all his people used to call him an Uncle Tom and a coon,
You know what I'm
and
saying?
sellout.
Yeah.
But he was there working for them the whole time.
Yeah, and he I don't want to go blow nothing up like he did in the movie, you know what I mean? But just in terms of being able to mobilize his homies to a higher cause, you know?
So there were a couple that were kind of like yes.
Yeah, but most of those films were not made by black people, trust me. Yeah? They're black stars, but the real revolution started with Spike Lee.
Okay.
And we can name the film Spike Lee, She's Gotta Have It.
Yeah.
That is the beginnings of modern black cinema.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. And then what Spike Lee did, when Spike Lee's films came out, everyone was shocked. Because you know the storyline of She's Gotta Have It is one woman having 3 boyfriends.
Yeah.
And it had sex scenes. What do you mean black people have sex? You never saw black people even kissing.
For real?
I'm telling you, this is how
It was very rare. It was very rare. It was very rare.
No, it was not rare, brethren. It wasn't shown.
It wasn't done.
Period.
But Sidney Poitier, wasn't there some? No.
Yeah, Sidney Poitier, he was kind of kissing women, wasn't he? White women. And
I think black women.
So, when it came to
black intimacy, like reality of black relationships. Yeah.
When Spike Lee came, when Spike Lee did that, that was the first time the world saw that type of thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Damn, my generation had no clue about that. We
Right,
just grew up in it.
Your generation.
We just seen it.
Yeah,
we had
you're
Boomerang,
the
we had everything.
beneficiaries.
Yeah.
You understand? So Spike Lee, then you had people like John Singleton, you had people like the Hudlin Brothers, the film House Party.
Yeah.
You had New Jack City.
Yeah, yeah.
So these were the kinds of things, and it was like we saw ourselves on TV. And then before that, the African Americans created TV series.
Yes.
And going all the way back.
Yeah.
And then some of those were made available for people in Britain to see.
Wow, you know, it's what you just said has really blown my mind, because you giving me a understanding of that timeline. It's made me understand. My generation, we had Boomerang, we had Love and Basketball, and all these black...
All these things didn't exist. Listen, bro. I'll drop this on one of my school... You know, I'm the head of a Saturday school.
Yeah.
I dropped this on one of my Saturday school teachers. There was a TV program that came out in the 90s, and at the time, it was considered progressive. The TV program was Gladiators. Right? And what Gladiators was, it was a kind of... You had these gladiators that were part of the show, and you had the general public.
Yeah, I remember. Gladiators, are you ready?
That's right.
Contestants, are you ready?
Right.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right, do you remember the names of the black gladiators?
Rhino.
Nightshade.
Nightshade? Seriously?
Shadow.
Damn, you're right. You're right.
And Saracen.
Saracen, yeah. Saracen was a pretty cool name.
Saracen is like, isn't Saracen like what they used to call Moors and that back in the days, yeah.
So in other words, black.
You know, I never clocked that.
Saracen,
I remember Saracen, but I didn't know what Saracen meant at the time.
Shadow and Nightshade.
You know, I never thought of that. And then when I'm looking back now, those names are ringing bells now.
Right.
And I remember Rhino, where he came after. I think someone must have corrected him about it, because he came after Rhino. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that.
I used to love that. John Fashanu.
Yeah. I used to love
that. Getting that gig was game changing. Because back in the day, he would not have got that gig.
Yeah.
So in other words, you can see the extent to which, even in the 90s, we were racialized to that extent.
So yeah, guys, thank you very much for coming. It's been a very interesting conversation. And guys, those of you who watch, if there's anything you wanna, comment on for maybe our third conversation, please feel free to comment on things that you agree or disagree with. Please comment on that. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching the Drazzy Show. Yep.
Could I just say, guys, you know, myself and
The Black
Robin,
Secret. The Black Secret.
we're from the Black Secret.
Yeah.
So you can go to www.theblacksecret.co.uk. We have some amazing content on there, and we also have some free content which you can download, which is our PDF book, 100 History Black Facts, which is a taster for our course. So you can get that if you scroll down, go into the sort of like comment section. You'll be able to see the details. I'm sure
in the
Travis is gonna
description,
have it
yeah,
up
and I'll
there.
go across the screen as
So
well.
you know, just download the book. It's amazing, and it's all yours for free. And the last thing I'd like to say, I was slightly late today. Listen,
I didn't want to touch on that.
I
You were late on the last show, late on this show.
Brother George is always late, but I have to give a shout out to Kamel Patel.
All right.
From a pharmacist down the road who kind of like helped me out.
Okay.
Because otherwise I probably wouldn't be here at all.
Big up to Kamel Patel.
I'm definitely going to talk to him, Kamal, and also probably introduce him to Drazzy because he's doing some crazy stuff, this guy.
Oh, yeah?
It was meant to be.
Okay.
I was meant to meet him, but
Good,
yes,
good,
definitely.
good.
But thank you all very much for listening to us, and we hope that you take what has been said seriously and just think about it and do the research.
Yeah,
Find
there's
out
a lot of
because
knowledge.
There's so much history out there.
A lot of knowledge. So, guys, that's it. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Comment, like, share, subscribe. Share this video. Share the knowledge for everyone. If you don't do it, what was that you used before? You said if you haven't read this book, you're a what? You're a sellout. If you don't share this video, you're a sellout.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Shouts out to Robin Walker. Shouts out to Brother George. And of course, shouts out to Drazzy. Please go check out his channel. Until next time, peace.
When I went to Africa, I had spent 2 years in England studying Africa. I was still ashamed because nobody in my school, no professor ever told me anything good about Africa. It is then when I began to see what colonization means when it affects imagination. That you could change power and you could turn from a white to a black, and you're going to still be doing the same damn thing because this hasn't changed. And this does not change until you begin to understand where you come from. You can't change consciousness unless you change your vision of history, because the present is in the past. It didn't suddenly come up like that. It has roots in that history, or that false vision of history. So we take a lot of things for granted. You know, the Europeans have filled our heads up with the idea that they made it all. You know how much the Africans lost? Do you think you could take millions of people out of a continent, drag the youth, a whole generations of people out of a continent, smash it up, rip it, the guts and heart out of Africa, take away its wealth, take away its structures, and drag these people across the ocean, shatter them, and then say, well, look at the Africans, they never did anything. When you take every blasted thing away from them, we are always just pieces of ourselves thrown all over the place. In order to reconstruct our history, it was like looking at an aeroplane that had exploded in the middle of the sky. And I had to go and pick up all the little pieces to find the black box. Where we have found the black box. We know why we crashed. And we know where the pieces are. Let us put them together.